Polyphonic versus monophonic versus paraphonic versus duophonic. Confused yet? We're here to help. Hi, this is Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us on alamomusic.com. And today we're going to be talking about the differences between polyphonic analog synthesizers and monophonic analog synthesizers. And the reason we're talking about this is because there's a lot of confusion around this topic. And there's confusion for beginners. What's the difference? What are these things? I have no idea. The words are a little intimidating. And there's confusion for experienced people, not necessarily in the basic definition, but which of these is right for me. I might have a polyphonic synth or a monophonic synth, but why are there different? Why do people make monophonic synths? And other questions that sometimes get asked is, what's a duophonic synth or what's a paraphonic synth? And I'm going to go into both of those topics. Okay, for the beginner, here's the differences, and then also for the guy that knows what guy or gal that knows what the basic definition is, what are some of the nuances. So what's interesting about that is, even though you can only play a single note on a monophonic synthesizer, it has nothing to do with how complex the instrument is, which is a little counterintuitive. You think about a piano, one note versus a chord, that's all the difference in the world. It's very different. The chord is everything for creating complexity and sound. So on a monophonic synth, why is that the case? The reason is the way analog synthesizers generate sound. They generate sound via oscillators. And monophonic synths almost always have more than one oscillator in them. And so you have 2 or 3 oscillators, and you have envelopes, and you have filters, and you can modulate, and all those things. So you take the oscillator and you run it through this signal path of different things, and it creates a very complex and rich sound. And so it's interesting. So an example would be, this one right here has 2 oscillators, and you can even tune the oscillators differently. And so you play a note, and you're getting an interval. You're getting a basic chord via tuning the oscillators to different pitches. And so on a monophonic synth, even though you can just trigger the oscillators with a note at a time, you still can create very complex sounds. So that's a little bit about the differences on the polyphonic and monophonic on a basic level. Let's get into, okay, you already knew that. Which one is right for you? Why would you want a monophonic synth? That's the question that a lot of people I see come up online, and it's kind of intuitive. It's like, well, why would I want where I could play multiple notes? So let's think about other monophonic instruments: a saxophone, a clarinet, bass guitar. It's not exactly only monophonic, but for the most part, you use it monophonically. And you think about the character of those instruments. Do you want a chord of saxophones? Probably not. It doesn't sound that great. Do you want to play chords on a bass guitar? Usually it's too muddy, right? So a monophonic synth is really more of a foundational instrument for song creation or expression. It's almost like bass in a band setting. So you're playing the bass riff, you're playing the low end frequencies, and you're painting with a very specific brush. It's not as broad a brush. A polyphonic synth is more like a acoustic guitar or a piano. It's wide strokes, it's chords. It's not so much about the specific notes in the chord. It's this broader stroke that is creating and kind of shaping the trajectory of the painting or the song, right? So that's even true of the way the synths are designed. Monophonic synths are designed to get really specific sounds that are very complex. Polyphonic synths are designed to give you the maximum amount of broad expression and kind of interesting textural, interesting textures and interesting strokes that you can make with the synth itself. So really, that's how you want to think about it. On a monophonic synth, if you're thinking more, I want a specific sound, I want a lead line, I want something, this is going to carry the melody or carry the rhythm component of this song, really a monophonic synth is often the way to go. Polyphonic synth is more, you want to lay the basic chords, you want to create the pads, you want to set the harmonic structure of the song. Polyphonic synths are much better at that. I would also, another thing about monophonic synths that I think is really fun is constraint. So putting constraint on what you can do often breeds a lot of creativity. So I like to play on monophonic synths because of the limitations. It forces you to think differently about the music. And so it really pushes you to figure out interesting things to do monophonically that have nothing to do with chords. And so I think that's a fun exercise. So monophonic synths are also good. This is just a personal opinion. I think they're good to push you musically to think different ways, in addition to just being a cool instrument that's complex in its own right. So really that's I would say the difference. If you knew the basic definition, but you were like, well, why would I ever want a monophonic synth? That's kind of how I would describe it. In addition to that, I wanted to talk about duophonic and paraphonic. Those are kind of hybrid between polyphonic and monophonic. Usually you're going to see that out of a monophonic synth, someone fiddling with the signal path to get it to produce two notes. And the way they do that is you can control, they say this has two oscillators. You can technically break out the oscillators and have two control points if you use the patch bay. And a lot of monophonic synths, you can do that. You can get control over the oscillators. And so it's different in that it's not using both oscillators to generate two notes. You're breaking the oscillators apart and having them generate different notes via MIDI. So it's a little complex. It's kind of a hot rod, cool trick you can do on monophonic synths. So that's the difference. That's what a duophonic synth, when someone uses that word, that's what they're talking about. Paraphonic is a distinction between duophonic and it's like a sub-distinction of duophonic. Paraphonic means that the signal path for the oscillators is going through the same signal path. You can't change the signal path at all. So if it's a paraphonic, it's functioning and you've broken the oscillators out, but it's sending it through the same signal path on the synth. And if it's duophonic, true duophonic, it is you broke the oscillators out and you can send it via different signal paths. So different, if there's multiple filters or there's multiple envelopes, you can send it via different paths. So that's the difference there. So it's kind of a technical difference, and but if you're wondering, that's what it means. So let me show you what you can do on these. Let me play around a little bit, and we'll go from there. And if you have any other questions, write them below. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the sonic differences between a monophonic synth and a polyphonic synth. Two things I forgot to mention earlier. One, on a polyphonic synth, on an analog polyphonic synth, I should say, you are limited to the amount of notes you can play based on the synth. On this one, it's 12, which is a lot for an analog synth. Normally, you're looking at between 4 and 8. Generally, it's rare to find one more than 16. So you're pretty limited still in the amount of notes that you can play. In comparison, on a digital synthesizer, the polyphony is often in like the 256 versus 16 or 12 or whatever. So you kind of get a sense of how different that is. And really the only difference that makes is when you're playing in very fast passages, notes will fall out if you don't have 256 polyphony. Those notes will fall out if you're playing incredibly fast. So for a pianist, that's really important. For people doing chords and different kind of just basic kind of songwriting, it's not as important. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is I want to give you a couple recommendations for interesting monophonic and polyphonic synths that are available today. So the Arturia Brute series from the Mini Brute, the Micro Brute, and the Matrix Brute are amazing monophonic synthesizers that I think are really worth checking out if you haven't already checked one out. They remind me a lot of Roland, like vintage Roland monophonic synthesizers. I think that they're very, they have that character for me personally. I've really liked the SH2, the SH9, some of those, and these are really worth your time to check out. Arturia is doing really cool stuff. This is a really great synth that they put out. Another one you should check out is the Behringer analog monophonic synths that they've been putting out. A lot of those are recreations, true analog recreations of classic monophonic synths like the MS1, which is a recreation of the SH101. And that is also, that's like if you watch comparison videos, they sound like the vintage synths and they're really fun to play with. So I would check out Behringer's monophonic synths. Both of those are very affordable. If you want to go on the high-end range, Moog and Dave Smith with Sequential have the Pro, I think it's the Pro 3 just came out. That's a very powerful analog monophonic synth. And Moog also has a couple of really fun monophonic synths that are kind of modern versions. So am I leaving anybody out? Korg as well. So Korg, all those guys, there's a lot of very cool monophonic synths on the market, and I think they're underrated. Every guitarist needs a bass guitar. Everybody with a polyphonic synth needs at least one monophonic synth. If you've never owned one, please do yourself a favor and get one. It'll really expand your songwriting and your ability to kind of create, in my opinion. I think monophonic synths are some of the funnest synths to use and play on. And so that's kind of all I got. If you have any other questions, comments, leave them below. If I left something out, leave it below. You can write us at yourfriends@alamomusic.com, or you can go on our website and chat with us. We'd love to hear from you. And stay tuned. We'll have more content coming out.